Welcome to Unit 2 review for Test 3. Snow globe I thought was fitting because that's what it looks like outside right now on Saturday morning. So we're talking about the New Deal Coalition, and this is going to include labor unions, African Americans, Catholics and Jews, as well as Southerners. And this is something that really helped the Democratic candidates between 1932 and 1966. Remember, business leaders are not going to be part of that New Deal coalition because they're not going to enjoy the size of government that FDR envisioned for the Democratic Party and for our nation. 1860 and 1932 elections have been pointed to as periods of realignment. Remember that realignment is when the voting public switches from major support of one party to major support of another party, or a group of people shift. Voting eligibility is left up to the states. Remember that that's one of the reasons that we have the current controversy with voting ID laws. Third parties, we're talking about political parties, third parties tend to be most successful when they break off from one of the two major parties. Those are called splinter parties. Think of the Tea Party in the House right now. Most of those congressmen were elected as members of the Republican Party, but have formed a caucus in the House of Tea Party people. In the late 19th century, the Populist Party is going to be supporting the direct election of senators. Remember, that becomes the eventual 17th Amendment, as well as initiative, referendum, and recall. All three of those are ways to get people more involved in the democratic process and are now part of our democracy. Political parties in the late 20th century are going to be categorized by an increase in the number of organized interest groups, an increase in the number and influence of PACs. Both of those things are reflective of, in some part, to the rise of campaign finance reform and the loopholes that were included in those. Thirdly, state adoption of primary elections. We have those in all of the states now, and that increases the level of democracy and also civic engagement for people. And also the loss of party patronage power. Political parties lost some power and influence when they were not able to continue their practice of rewarding party loyalty with governmental jobs. So when talking about political parties, you have to remember that the Constitution does not address political parties. And lastly, since the 1960s, support for the Democratic Party has declined among white Southerners because you have seen the focus of the Democratic Party shift from the party that was anti-civil rights to now being more inclusive of diversity. Typically in any election year, when talking about party platforms, the Republican Party platform is going to include things like cutting social welfare spending and deregulation of business, because both of those things decrease the size of the federal government. But also, conversely, they would like to increase defense spending. And a lot of times, the Republican Party platform has been increasingly influenced by evangelical Christians. And from your project on the political platforms, remember that the platform is the document where the party summarizes its goal at the National Convention. Oftentimes those are very large documents, as you know from going through those when you compared the party platforms in 2008 and 2012. Campaign finance reform, Citizens United versus FEC in 2010, in response to McCain-Feingold, stated that independent campaign expenditures, remember that's money that they are spending on behalf of a candidate, by corporations and unions are protected by the First Amendment. So in other words, that made labor unions and corporations people too, and more importantly, that saw the advent of the super PACs, and super PACs have less regulation than PACs, and PACs have less regulation than the candidate does. Unfortunately, the government does not prohibit negative advertising, and that's one of the reasons why in a general election that gets very controversial and very high levels of competitiveness oftentimes see a lot of negative advertising and mudslinging. Party officials, let's talk about some vocabulary here. Party officials for whom seats are reserved at the National Convention are called superdelegates. Superdelegates do not necessarily have to vote the way that their state members who voted directed their delegates to vote, but they oftentimes do because they have high levels of party loyalty. Patronage, as I was just talking about earlier, is most closely associated with party machines, and the loss of patronage really has put a crimp in some of the practices of those two political parties. An iron triangle, as you know from your presentation on iron triangles, consists of your 3 points: bureaucratic agency, congressional committee, and an interest group. Devolution allows states to have more say in how to achieve the specific goals of legislation. Devolution is like passing the buck. It's making the federal government smaller because it pushes the responsibilities onto the state, or it makes the state government smaller because it pushes the responsibilities onto the local governments. The generational effect, which is also known as the age cohort effect, is the impact of an important external event in shaping the views of a generation. For an example, you have the Pearl Harbor generation, which we just celebrated the anniversary of last week. You have the Vietnam generation, and political scientists now are still measuring the effects in terms of your generation and your voting patterns when it comes to September 11th, 2001. PACs, political action committees, make contributions to gain access to legislators, but politicians have to be very careful because they do not want to be seen as connected to a specific PAC, because they do not want people to think that the PAC was able to buy influence or buy a vote. A mandate is something one level of government forces another level of government to comply with. Sometimes that can be through devolution, but they could be funded or unfunded. A perfect example of a mandate is the Americans with Disabilities Act, passed during the first George H.W. Bush administration in the late 80s and early 90s. This is why we have the buttons that you push to get into the school that allow the doors to open. It's why we have ramps on the sidewalks. It's why all public buildings have to have handicap accessibility. Interest groups are going to use lots of different techniques. They're going to testify before congressional committees because they can oftentimes offer very pinpointed information, although it be biased. They can sponsor issue advocacy ads. They lobby federal agencies. They file federal lawsuits. They use litigation to challenge policies in the courts, and litigation is the process of taking legal action. Collective goods are when a group works on behalf of the population and everyone shares in the benefits, also known as public goods. Political efficacy is the belief that a person's vote is important and can significantly influence public policy. If you have a high level of political efficacy, oftentimes you are very civically engaged. Federalist 51 deals with separation of powers. And the Founding Fathers said if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And that shows the fact that we need to make sure that there is a separation of power along with a system of checks and balances. The gender gap can be defined as the measurable difference in the way women and men vote for candidates and in the way they view political issues. Remember, men are more likely to support defense spending, things like that. Women are more likely to support social welfare programs. Tracking poll measures the change in public opinion over the course of time. So they're going to ask the same question every month or every week or every year, depending on what the topic is. That's where we come up with, the levels of trust in the legislative branch, which has the lowest, or the judicial branch, which has the highest. It also measures media bias, which we'll find out in our next chapter. Okay, so when comparing the pluralist theory versus the elitist theory, the pluralist theory emphasizes how important it is for a democracy to have large numbers of diverse groups representing a wide variety of interest groups. So they're believing that the power is generated by that diversity, whereas the elite theory states that a ruling class composed of wealthy, educated individuals wields most of the power in government, and that is where the power of government is. So basically, it's just a difference in where you believe the power originates from for our government. Remember that the test is on Tuesday. There are 60 multiple choice questions, and then Wednesday there is an FRQ. We're doing one in class. And good luck with your studying.